Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 605. I'm the host of the show, Kyle Anzalone. Today, joined by co-host of the show, Connor Freeman. Connor, how you doing?
Doing well, Kyle. How are you?
Doing very well, Connor. Happy to have you back here today. And if people haven't gotten a chance already, I highly recommend they check out your recent appearance on Judge Napolitano's Judging Freedom. You could easily find it just by going to his YouTube channel and searching for it. And along with that, you can check out this show at the Libertarian Institute, antiwar.com, YouTube, Rumble, and Odysee for the video version of the show. It's up anywhere you could listen to audio podcasts. And of course, you can follow the show on Twitter at @KyleAnzalone_. Let's get into the news today. All right, I have a couple articles to start off the show today with before I hand it over to Connor. First up here, amount of aid entering Gaza plummeted after Israeli invasion of Rafah. So this is from Reuters. The United Nations, which has warned of famine in Gaza, said on Wednesday that the amount of humanitarian aid entering the enclave has dropped by 2/3 since Israel began its military operations in the enclave's southern Rafah region this month. The amount of food that has entered Gaza and other aid entering Gaza, already insufficient to meet the needs of the soaring needs, has further shrunk since May 7th, the UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, OSHA, said. A daily average of 58 trucks reached Gaza from May 7th to Tuesday, compared to 106 aid trucks from April 1st until May 6th. OCHA said, a drop of 67%. It said those figures excluded private sector cargo and fuel. The United Nations has long said that at least 500 trucks of aid needs to enter Gaza each day. Since the Israel-Hamas war began nearly 8 months ago, aid for 2.3 million Palestinians has primarily entered through two crossings in southern Gaza, the Rafah crossing from Egypt and Karim Shalom from Israel. But deliveries were disrupted when Israel stepped up its military operations in Rafah with the stated aim of routing remaining units of Hamas fighters. Egypt closed the Rafah crossing due to the threat posed to humanitarian work, but on Friday agreed to temporarily send a backlog of aid and fuel via Karim Shalom. And a little confusing there because the border crossing was closed by Israel taking the border crossing, not by Egypt, but I guess that's the spin that Reuters is putting out here. And then one final quote from the UN Human Rights Association. Aid shipments have diminished due to the closure of Rafah crossing, the inability to safely and consistently pick up commodities from the Karim Shalom crossing, and limited deliveries through other entry points. And so, Connor, not looking good for the people of Gaza. And then this is a follow-up to a article that I talked about on Wednesday's show, and that was that Israel was surveilling and attempting to intimidate the International Criminal Court. And so there was the initial report from The Guardian, and now we have this from 972 magazine and Tel Aviv outlet. They report for nearly a decade, Israel has been surveilling senior International Criminal Court officials and Palestinian human rights workers as a part of a secret operation to thwart the ICC's probe into alleged war crimes. A joint investigation by 972 magazine, local call, and The Guardian can reveal. The multiple agency operation, which dates back to 2015, has seen Israeli intelligence community routinely surveilled the court's current chief prosecutor Karim Khan, his predecessor Fatou Bensouda, and dozens of other ICC and UN officials. Israeli intelligence also monitored material that the Palestinian Authority submitted to the prosecutor's office and surveilled envelopes at 4 Palestinian human rights organizations who submissions are central to the probe. And you have to wonder too, Connor, what other information they got there, and maybe what Israel did to take out anybody who may be a witness to a potential crime or things like that, destroy evidence. I'm sure there's a lot of other things that they were able to gain by, essentially being a part of the prosecution here and finding all the evidence covertly. They could have really destroyed or hindered a lot of this from coming forward. So back to the 972 article here. According to sources, the covert operation mobilized the highest branches of Israel's government, intelligence community, and both the civilian and military legal systems in order to derail the probe. The intelligence information obtained via surveillance was passed on to a secret team of top Israeli government lawyers and diplomats who traveled to The Hague for confidential meetings with ICC officials in an attempt to feed the chief prosecutor information that would make her doubt the basis of her right to be dealing with this question. And so, Connor, it sounds like what they were doing was something that what happened to Colin Powell and Larry Wilkerson apparently at one point, which is when the debate on, I believe, the Iran's nuclear program, they were being surveilled. And so, they would discuss issues they had with the particular evidence that was being provided by the CIA. And then the CIA would suddenly come back and they say, oh, we just had this guy in Gitmo confess to doing this thing that you said wasn't being done. Or they didn't say you said, because obviously they don't know about, but this is really a way to manipulate people in investigation by presenting evidence that is, contrary to a particular thing that they're looking at, but they don't know that what the evidence is. So this is seems quite nefarious. So the intelligence was also used by the Israeli military to retroactively open investigations into interests that were of interest to the ICC to try to prove that the Israelis' legal system was capable of holding its own to account. Additionally, as The Guardian reported earlier, that was on Wednesday, the Mossad, Israel's foreign intelligence agency, ran its own parallel operation which sought out compelling information on Bensouda and her close family members in an apparent attempt to sabotage the ICC's investigation. The agency's former head, Yossi Cohen, personally attempted to enlist Bensouda and manipulate her into complying with the Israeli wishes, according to sources familiar with his activities, causing the prosecutor to then fear for her personal safety and the safety of her family. And Connor, imagine if somebody comes to you and, a couple weeks ago, you're out hiking with a family member or something like that, and you were talking about something on that hike, and then somebody comes up to you with photographs and an audio recording of that hike, and they just say, hey, just so you know, we know where you are and who you're talking to and everything else. That's definitely an act of intimidation. That's definitely something the mafia would do to try to get a prosecutor to back off. And it's an essential threat on their life, right? That, we could reach out and touch your family if we want to. So the last thing I have from the article here, moreover, according to several sources, Israel's underhanded efforts to interfere with the investigation, which could amount to offenses against the administration and justice, punishable by prison sentence, have been managed from the very top. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is said to have taken a keen interest in the operation, even sending the intelligence team's instructions and areas of interest regarding the monitoring of ICC officials. One source stressed that Netanyahu was obsessed with finding out what material the ICC was receiving. And so that's all I have for today. Connor, I'm going to hand it over to you. I know you got a lot of important stuff on what Israel's up to, not only in Gaza, but the rest of the Middle East.
Yeah, absolutely. So the first story we're starting off with today is Dave DeCamps at antiwar.com from the 29th. We have another State Department official resigning over the genocidal war against Gaza. And so Dave writes, another State Department official has resigned over President Biden's support for Israel's slaughter of the Palestinians in Gaza. The Washington Post reported on Wednesday. Stacey Gilbert, a career official who worked in the State Department's Bureau of Population, Refugees, and Migration, said in a resignation email to her colleagues that she disagreed with a State Department report that claimed Israel has not been blocking aid deliveries into Gaza. The State Department report also said that Israel was likely violating U.S. and international law with U.S.-provided weapons, but claimed that there was not sufficient evidence to prove it. The conclusion of the report, which was issued under a new national security memorandum, allows the U.S. to continue shipping weapons to Israel. Gilbert resigned on Tuesday, and Josh Paul, who resigned from the State Department back in October, pointed to the fact that it was on the same day the Biden administration made clear Israel's bombing of displaced Palestinians at a tent camp in Rafah wouldn't impact U.S. support. So this is from the Washington Post piece. Josh Paul says, on the day when the White House announced that the latest atrocity in Rafah did not cross its red line, this resignation demonstrates that the Biden administration will do anything to avoid the truth. And he wrote this on LinkedIn after this article from the Post was published online. He says, this is not just a story of bureaucratic complicity or ineptitude. There are people signing off on arms transfers, people drafting arms transfer approval memos, people turning a blind eye, Paul wrote. People, quote, who could be speaking up, people who have an awesome responsibility to do good and a lifelong commitment to human rights, whose choice is to let the bureaucracy function as though it were business as usual. The report Gilbert objected to was published this month in response to a presidential memo known as National Security Memorandum 20. Biden issued the memo in February after coming under pressure from congressional Democrats concerned about the rising death toll in Gaza. It required the State Department to assess whether Israel's use of American weapons in Gaza was violating U.S. or international humanitarian law, and include an examination of whether humanitarian aid had been deliberately obstructed. The report, the product of weeks of discussion within the Pentagon and the State Department, found that while, quote, aid remains insufficient, the United States, quote, does not currently assess that the Israeli government is prohibiting or otherwise restricting the transport of the delivery of U.S. humanitarian assistance. And that's clearly not true, but even more specifically, we've watched videos of Israeli settlers taking U.S. aid off of trucks and destroying it, just throwing them on the ground, bags of flour and other foodstuffs, and just ripping them up and throwing them on the ground and deliberately destroying them. And the IDF stands by and does nothing, and people film it, and it's almost a national pastime to help tighten the starvation siege on the Palestinians, where you have, the 2.3 million people living there are all basically on the brink of starvation, barely can find any food to eat, and well over 1 million are in, level 5 catastrophic stages of starvation. And so Gilbert, whose views were echoed by the vast majority of aid and humanitarian organizations, say that Israel was impeding the aid from reaching civilians in Gaza. Aid flows have continued to be constricted in the weeks since the report was issued, but the report found insufficient grounds to halt aid to Israel. Along with Paul, a handful of Biden administration officials have resigned since the conflict began in October, including Anel Sheline, who we've discussed on the show before, who worked on human rights issues, and Hala Rarit, one of the department's Arabic language spokespeople. Still more have expressed unhappiness with administration policy by sending cables via the internal dissent channel, a process intended to allow diplomats to articulate disagreement without fear of retribution. After Rarit resigned, she said that as the months of the conflict progressed, it became more clear that internal discussion about U.S.-Israeli policy is unwelcome. Unlike almost every other subject during her 18-year career at the State Department. She made some interesting comments about how her job was basically to do PR in the Arab world, and that in order to do her job, which is to basically promote or make excuses for the Biden administration policy with respect to Palestine, it just became impossible for her to do it. She couldn't stomach doing it anymore. And basically she talked about how we were engendering resentment all throughout the region by attempting to even justify the mass slaughter of the Palestinians, which every bit of it is underwritten by Washington. So, as Dave says, so far, 4 State Department officials have resigned over the genocidal war in Gaza, and 3 officials from other departments, including one from the Interior Department, the Education Department, and a U.S. Army major who worked for the Pentagon's Defense Intelligence Agency. Another element of this Washington Post piece is they suggest the U.S. line basically says that we welcome all these we welcome a wide variety of contrasting views, and we think it makes us better. And we have, sort of lively debates about these issues. And obviously, the statement that's been made by both of these officials, Gilbert and Rarit, indicates that that's just a lie. And you can see that you wouldn't expect anything less from the State Department run by Tony Blinken, who is just an ardent Zionist. And really spends no time doing actual diplomacy, and really is just a full-time war hawk, but particularly on behalf of Israel. I remember he said once that he goes, I inherited my Zionism. He's very committed to this policy, being Biden's right-hand man on foreign policy for decades and decades. It's kind of par for the course, given that Biden received more funding from the Israel lobby than any senator in U.S. history and was long known behind the scenes as Israel's man in Washington. And that's exactly, even if Joe Biden is more or less half dead, his administration is ruling just the way that he would, given his prior track record. And so it is completely unsurprising that we're seeing so much resistance from people who apparently there are still people working in the U.S. government who have, a conscience and want to do the right thing here. And I think each one of these, it piles up and, buttresses the case against the war that people like Kyle or myself might make, or whether it's the Code Pink people or the college protesters or whoever, different activist groups, anti-war groups, Jewish groups that are anti-Zionist activists. It's very important to be able to point to U.S. officials who have resigned over moral objections to the mass slaughter of the Palestinians, because as we'll see in these subsequent stories, the Americans and the Israelis clearly have no problem lying through their teeth to the American people, to the world, in order to justify this horrific ethnic cleansing campaign against the civilian population of what was already an open-air prison or concentration camp. People who had been impoverished and bombed for years and years and abused and exploited and deprived, and now they're just doing away with them like they're surplus humanity, that their lives are forfeit because they're ethnic undesirables. It's very sick, and the longer this goes on, I hope we see a great deal more of these resignations. The internal dissent memo stuff, it sounds nice, but I think the resignations are obviously much more effective because it's all public. And according, as I said, to these whistleblowers, the actual discussions behind the scenes are not actually having any impact. So this next story is about the ICC. What Kyle was talking about earlier with the first story. We're getting more into how Karim Khan is being pressured by the Israelis because, of course, this spying operation, this covert war against the ICC and his predecessor has carried over, because the culmination of the investigation, which really sort of was conceived in 2015 when about this covert campaign began in earnest. This is the fruits of that process, and it's kind of the Israelis' worst nightmare. But as you say, they have clearly have sources, according to these reports, within the office of the prosecution, and so they'll have a leg up on opposing whatever's coming down the pipe, or having their spin ready to go. So this is from Middle East Eye on the 28th. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, the title is Obsessed Netanyahu Constantly Updated on Israel's Operations Against the ICC. So Netanyahu receives advanced knowledge. He received advanced knowledge of the ICC prosecutors' plans for him as a result of surveillance and hacking carried out by his intelligence agencies. So according to a joint report by The Guardian and 972 Mag, Israel has carried out an almost decade-long campaign of surveillance against the Hague-based court, as well as hacking, smearing, and allegedly threatening both current chief prosecutor Karim Khan and his predecessor Fatou Bensouda. Now, one intelligence source says that Netanyahu was obsessed, quote, with intercepts acquired by the intelligence agencies from the court. Sources said that the operations against the ICC were carried out by the Shin Bet, which is sort of the the Israeli analog to the FBI, as well as the military's intelligence directorate, Unman, a cyber intelligence division, Unit 8200. Information gleaned was distributed to the Israeli ministries of Justice, Foreign Affairs, and Strategic Affairs. Khan hinted at the pressure being applied on him by the Israelis when he announced he was seeking prosecutions for Netanyahu and Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, as well as several Hamas leaders. He said, quote, I insist that all attempts to impede, intimidate, or improperly influence the officials of this court must cease immediately, he said at the time, adding that if there were any further attempts, quote, my office will not hesitate to act. So one intercepted message revealed that Khan was under, quote, tremendous pressure from the United States not to attempt to prosecute Israelis, according to a source familiar with its comments. An earlier report by The Guardian and 972 Mag earlier this week on Tuesday revealed that Yossi Cohen, who at the time was the director of the Mossad, helmed an operation to pressure Bennasuda into abandoning the inquiry into Israel. In the years leading up to Bennasuda's decision to open the inquiry in 2021, Cohen allegedly deployed despicable tactics, according to accounts by ICC officials who likened his behavior to stalking. And one of the things that they mentioned is that he was constantly calling her. And when that first started, she asked him, "How did you get my phone number?" And he goes, "Have you forgotten what I do for a living?" And there's some pretty wild stories, like when the ICC was investigating war crimes committed in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. She met with the prime minister, or the president, excuse me, of the DRC in a Manhattan hotel suite. They asked her sort of security personnel or her aides to leave the room, and then Yossi Cohen walks into the room. And it was clear that there was coordination between the former president of the Congo, of the DRC, and the Mossad chief. And it's one of these instances where she was constantly being hounded by him without warning, and with all these threats being made and all this intimidation. According to one account, Cohen told Bennasuda, "You should help us and let us take care of you. You don't want to be getting into things that could compromise your security or that of your family." Mossad also closely observed Bennasuda's family, obtaining transcripts of secret recordings of her husband in a bid to use them to discredit her, two sources allege. Bennasuda's investigation concluded in last week's announcement by the current chief prosecutor, Karim Khan, that he was seeking arrest warrants for the senior Israeli leaders for these war crimes committed by the IDF in Gaza. Alongside Gallant and Netanyahu, the Hamas leaders Gaza Yawaz Sinwar, the military wing's commander-in-chief Mohammed Diab, and Mohammed Deif, he's also known as, and its political leader Ismail Haniyeh, who were named in the statement. And Haniyeh it's a difficult situation because he has been heavily involved in negotiations in attempts to broker ceasefires and hostage releases. Now, Gallant and Netanyahu face war crimes and crimes against humanity charges over the starvation of civilians as a method of warfare, willfully causing great suffering, willful killing, intentional attacks on a civilian population, and extermination alongside several other charges. The Hamas leaders also face charges related to extermination, murder, the taking of hostages, sexual assault, and torture alongside several more charges. One of the most interesting things about this is the willingness of Washington and Tel Aviv to commit atrocities in the wake of these announcements. And not only that, but the International Court of Justice's ruling that Israel should halt its military operations in Gaza because over the mass killing ongoing in Rafah, the final refuge for the internally displaced Palestinian people living in Gaza. And, in the wake of that, Israel carried out these massacres in Rafah and other areas this weekend and in the last few days, butchering women and children, then subsequently attacking hospitals where the wounded from these air raids were evacuated, and then preventing them from being able to get to somewhere else where healthcare can be provided using drones and other means. And also bombing more safe zones, more designated safe zones, just like the Tal al-Sultan area where the most notable massacre took place, where they killed 45 people, mostly women and children, and of course wounded hundreds more. And so as there's more international pressure being built on the Israelis, we just saw Norway, Spain, and Ireland recognize Palestine as a state. We're seeing the Israelis become increasingly erratic, potentially beyond even what we've seen so far. And Washington appears to be committed to going along with it and acting in a similar fashion. Because when the U.S. came out, the NSC spokespeople over the weekend came out and said that Israel has a right to do what it's doing in Rafah in the wake of this mass killing of 45 civilians. That was, they're basically completely defying the UN Charter, the UN, the World Court, and completely saying international law be damned. And that's not that the U.S. doesn't act in that way as a matter of course, but this is the fact that it's being carried out in this genocidal fashion in front of the whole world. This is, we're kind of crossing a Rubicon here. And so, more to the point, this next story from the Huffington Post, I thought they did a great write up of the situation in Rafah since this tent massacre took place, and the subsequent attacks on other facilities and other so-called safe zones. So this is by Sanjama Karanth from May 28th. International outrage over Israel's Rafah tent massacre has not slowed the IDF offensive. So, despite immediately facing outrage from the international community for killing dozens of displaced Palestinians in an attack that set a tent camp in Rafah, Gaza ablaze, Israel is continuing its deadly military offensive that is destroying the so-called safe zones, housing people with nowhere else to go. Israeli forces bombed a displaced camp in Tal al-Sultan on Sunday night, engulfing the tents sheltering Palestinians in flames. Gruesome footage showed charred corpses, people burned alive, and children's bodies torn apart. The Israeli attack killed at least 45 people and wounded hundreds more, and it resulted in condemnation and expressions of horror from many in the international community. Despite the IDF's claiming the attack was precision-based, Netanyahu said that the bombing was a, quote, tragic mistake. But less than 48 hours later, Israel bombed another makeshift tent camp in a designated civilian evacuation zone. Gaza emergency officials said that Israeli forces attacked a cluster of tents in al-Mawasi, an overcrowded coastal strip with no infrastructure that Israel has ordered refugees in Rafah to move to for safety. The shelling killed at least 21 people, more than half of them women and girls, according to the Gaza Health Ministry. There's a freelance journalist on the ground there who said, people are shocked, people cannot talk, people found themselves gathering the remains of human bodies of their beloved ones. And this journalist's name is Biswan Oda. She said this in an Instagram video on Tuesday, speaking over the sound of aircraft. Quote, so I just cannot describe anything because I'm afraid of looking under my feet because people are still collecting human pieces, she said, before showing one of the blood-splattered tents and saying, see the blood? See the blood and the shrapnel here and there? All these shrapnels, the holes in the blanket, killed people inside. The IDF denied on social media that it attacked the humanitarian area in al-Mawasi, but Palestinian journalists on the ground in Gaza refuted the military's claims. So there's an Al Jazeera correspondent on the ground named Hein Corday, who explained Tuesday, I went back just now, this is a quote, I went back just now to the last leaflet that Israelis dropped on Rafah, and a place that was targeted right now was Block 2360. And there, of course, she's referring to the leaflets the IDF dropped earlier this year to order Palestinians to evacuate Rafah. Quote, in this leaflet, the Israeli forces mentioned that they're calling people to evacuate to all the humanitarian areas, to Deir al-Balah, to Khan Yunis, and al-Mawasi area. And one of these areas that was mentioned is Block 2360, which has been targeted right now. So yes, this place was designated as safe. This place was designated as a humanitarian area, according to the last leaflet that was dropped by Israeli forces on people in Rafah. Like al-Mawasi, the Tal al-Sultan neighborhood is a designated humanitarian area. Gaza medics say that even after Sunday's massacre, Israel is still bombing Tal al-Sultan, killing 16 more Palestinians overnight. Awauda recorded herself at the scene on Monday, saying, quote, if death had a smell, I'm smelling it right now. Israel says that it will investigate itself over the Sunday attack on the Rafah tent camp. And now that it's been revealed that U.S. bombs, Boeing-made GBU-39 bombs were used in this attack on Rafah, it's pretty interesting to watch. It's everything you'd expect. State Department spokesman being confronted by, two or so great reporters in the room who are pushing back and demanding if this is crossing a red line and basically, what's our stance? I mean, you said you couldn't confirm previously with whether or not U.S. weapons were used on this attack, and now we have this, picture. We have evidence, images, and reports that indicate that these bombs were made in the USA. And they just keep saying, we'd like to refer you to the Israeli Defense Forces. They're carrying out an investigation, and we can't speak to the nature of we don't know. And they start using like military terms like about loading the bombs onto the aircraft. And and saying how like we're not involved in that process, so we can't comment. We refer you to the Israeli military. So I mean, it's the predictable response from the Biden administration, from this State Department, but again shows how just callous and shameless this administration is. Israel's going to investigate itself. Okay. A move that frequently ends in little to no accountability. And they argued Tuesday that the IDF's munitions were too small to have directly caused the blaze. The U.S., which continues to stand firmly beside Israel despite the international condemnation, and including from like heads of state like French President Emmanuel Macron, the European Union foreign policy chief also condemned the attack in the strongest terms. So it's a big deal. And we continue to see just there's no change in policy. And so let's see, the U.S., which continues to stand firmly behind Israel despite the international condemnation, said they will not change their policy on weapons transfers to the IDF because it still believes the massacres this week are not part of a full-fledged Rafah invasion. It's all about rhetoric. They're saying we don't want to see a major ground operation. We haven't seen that at this point, and that's what John Kirby told reporters earlier this week, despite Reuters reporting that Israeli tanks mounted with machine guns and armored vehicles have moved into central Rafah. Israel's military campaign, which was launched about 8 months ago after Hamas killed an estimated 1,190 people, has killed more than 36,000 Palestinians. According to the Gaza Health Ministry, the offensive has displaced most of the population of 2.3 million, leveling entire neighborhoods, creating a starvation crisis and disease epidemic, destroyed most hospitals, and blocked life-saving humanitarian aid from entering the enclave. The Sunday strike in Rafah occurred just days after the ICJ ordered Israel to halt its military operations in Rafah, and after the ICC's top war crimes prosecutor announced he was seeking warrants for leaders of both Israel and Hamas. Okay, so now these next stories are from Jason Ditz and Dave DeCamp at antiwar.com, covering the escalations on the part of the Israelis and the Americans and other countries in the region on behalf of defending Israel as it wages its genocide against the Palestinians, its final solution for the population of Gaza. Jason writes here in this article, Israel defense minister warns Hezbollah of escalation, vows Lebanese will pay the price. And the bombing has stepped up in southern Lebanon as well. They recently killed a physics teacher by bombing near a school and injured a lot of school children as well in the attack, or a handful of school children. And then they continue to bomb deeper and deeper, strike deeper and deeper into Lebanese territory in the northeast and, of course, the south. So Jason writes, Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant took a tour of command and control centers attached to Israeli Northern Command today, holding what officials are describing as an operational situation assessment. Gallant praised the precision of the Israeli troops, citing the 320 Hezbollah members who have been killed and saying Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah is dragging Lebanon into a very, very difficult reality. Although Gallant talking up escalation in Lebanon is nothing new, we've talked previously about these reports that the IDF is at the top levels is preparing Israeli society for a more full-scale war with Lebanon and Hezbollah. But he ominously added, quote, the ones who will pay the price are the residents of Lebanon. Gallant appeared to be most concerned about challenging Hezbollah's dismissal of his claims in April that half of Hezbollah's commanders have been killed in military operations. The defense minister then displayed photos of 9 Hezbollah officers killed by the IDF, who were described in the press as equivalent to brigadier generals. At the time, Gallant claimed half of Hezbollah's commanders were dead and the other half were in hiding. Analysts say this was likely a broad overestimation, as the size and structure of Hezbollah is not well understood. Accusing Nasrallah of claiming there were no casualties at all, Gallant challenged him with these photos, asking, all these people aren't yours, and insisting the 9 photos were only a partial list. And, I mean, striking top members of Hezbollah, just like when they do this to the Iranians, it's always increasing the risk of escalation. And concurrently with this, what they've done in Rafah is going to lay the groundwork for a much larger war in the near term. I think it's a very good possibility of that, because Netanyahu has numerous reasons to want to escalate and stay in power, whether it's with Iran or Hezbollah. Also, it could potentially drag the U.S. into the war, which could take some of the pressure off, because we know from all these DIA assessments that we've seen reported, whether it's in the Huffington Post or the Washington Post, major outlets that suggest that the Israel cannot, if they go to war with Hezbollah, they will lose. They're stretched way too thin right now. And this is from, U.S. officials behind the scenes going over all these assessments. But they worry that the Israeli war cabinet is hell bent on war with Hezbollah, which could be catastrophic, and that the Biden administration is basically on board and do or die with the Israelis. This is very, very risky. And then we have Israel bombing Syria again. Israeli airstrike in Syria kills child, wounds 10 civilians. Dave DeCamp wrote this on May 29th. So he says the Syrian Defense Ministry reported on Wednesday that an Israeli airstrike hit the coastal Syrian city of Banias, killing a girl and injuring 10 other civilians. The Israeli enemy launched an air attack in the direction of Lebanon, targeting a central site and a residential building in Banias city in the coastal region, killing a girl and wounding 10 civilians. The defense ministry said, according to AFP. The UK-based Syrian Observatory for Human Rights also reported a girl was killed in the strike and put the number of civilians injured at 20. Two explosions resonated in the coastal city of Banias, killing a girl, the SOHR said. Israel has bombed Syria multiple times this month after a brief lull in strikes following the April 1st Israeli bombing of the Iranian consulate in Damascus, which killed a senior Quds Force commander and provoked the first Iranian missile and drone attack on Israeli territory. On May 25th, an Israeli drone strike hit Syria and reportedly killed 2 members of Lebanese Hezbollah, marking the 3rd time within a week that Israel had bombed Syria. Israel has bombed Syria with impunity for years and has significantly increased strikes on the country since October 7th. Israel has been launching strikes in Lebanon on a near daily basis, and Hezbollah has been firing rockets on northern Israel. Since October, Israeli strikes in Lebanon have killed at least 425 people, including at least 82 civilians. Okay, and so the last story I have here is about Yemen. The Houthis have downed another U.S. MQ-9 Reaper drone. And this is from Dave DeCamp at antiwar.com on the 29th. The Houthis said Wednesday that their forces downed another U.S. MQ-9 Reaper drone over Yemen, and also claimed attacks on several ships as their campaign in response to Israel's onslaught in Gaza continues. The Associated Press reported that it analyzed images showing a U.S. MQ-9 on its belly in a desert and noted that the aircraft looked relatively intact. The Houthis said the drone was downed over Yemen's Marib province and released footage that showed an aircraft being hit with surface-to-air missiles. A Pentagon official told the AP that, quote, the U.S. Air Force has not lost any aircraft operating within CENTCOM's area of responsibility, and did not elaborate further, but the AP noted that the MQ-9 Reaper drones are sometimes operated by the CIA. The incident marks the 6th time the Houthis said they downed a U.S. MQ-9 Reaper drone since November of 2023. The drones cost about $30 million apiece, putting the cost for the U.S. at about $180 million on top of the over $1 billion the U.S. has already spent on munitions in its bombing campaign in Yemen and other operations in the region since October. The Houthis, officially known as Ansar Allah, also claimed that its forces targeted 6 ships from 3 different seas: the Mediterranean Sea, the Red Sea, and the Arabian Sea. The only attack that was confirmed was a missile attack on the Laks, a Greek-owned bulk carrier. While the Houthis say they're targeting Israeli-linked shipping, the Laks security company LSS SAPU said the vessel has no connection to Israel, and shipping data showed its destination was Iran. LSS SAPU said the ship and crew were safe and headed for their destination. But this shows once again that, as we've seen again in other reports from U.S. intelligence, that it's assessed that the bombing campaign is not putting a dent in the Houthis' capabilities, and it's not going to stop them from attacking now American and British warships and vessels and commercial vessels, but also, as of course, since they began this campaign, they were only targeting Israeli-linked shipping to put economic pressure on Israel to get them to lift the siege on Gaza and call and enact a ceasefire and stop murdering all these civilians, hundreds a day. And so we're now seeing how much more money is being robbed from the American people to paper over the failure, and I mean, atrocity doesn't begin to cover it of this policy in Gaza. So we're seeing the U.S. made pier, which has cost $320 million and is completely falling apart, which is not getting is even when it was barely getting any aid into the strip. That's $320 million. The Congress just robbed the American people of about $20 billion to pay for Israel's war this year, on top, 17 billion on top of the 3.8 billion that they get every year in unconditional military aid. They've also, we're spending billions more on top of that in order to put aid into to remedy to some degree the humanitarian crisis created by our war on Gaza. And then we see that we're blocking a peace deal in Yemen, a country where the U.S. has previously committed genocide with its other Middle East partners, the Gulf dictatorship satellites of Saudi Arabia and the UAE. And this is the poorest country in the Middle East. The UN and other figures show that about 400,000 people were killed in that war, at least, mostly children and infants and children under 5 years old, due to, once again, just like Gaza, putting a very poor area that's reliant on, well, either food imports. In the case of Yemen, 90% of their food was imported. Or in the case of Gaza, they're totally reliant on, or very much reliant on humanitarian aid. They required 500 trucks coming in of aid and supplies every single day. And all of that gets shut off. And then whether it's the Israelis or the Saudis, the U.S. provides them the planes, the bombs, and the intelligence, and they just go through and they bomb every kind of civilian infrastructure that would sustain life. Just to put as much pressure as possible on the civilian population, and in both cases we see a disproportionate number of children being murdered, either starved to death or killed with disease that's a result of bombing critical infrastructure combined with the blockade. Water systems and sewage and things of that nature, or just destroying farmland with white phosphorus or whatever, or just, blocking any kind of food, preventing, they mentioned earlier that they go to Deir al-Balah. It's a safe zone. I was just reading in Al Jazeera the other day how the Israelis are cutting off the fuel supply to I believe it's the Al-Aqsa Martyrs Hospital, one of the last hospitals that's still semi-functioning in Gaza. And they're cutting off its fuel supply. It's going to have to shut down now too. And they go to Khan Yunis. Everything has been destroyed in Khan Yunis. The city has been virtually wiped off the map. So we see the same kind of brutality unleashed against these people. And so even though we already killed 400,000 of them, we're committed to this indefinite, now it looks like an endless war. And we've added more sanctions on Yemen, blocked a peace deal, which the Saudis are very keen on implementing because they don't want any part in this war anymore. And which is something we should all be very thankful for. But of course, we can always rely on the Biden administration to prevent peace wherever possible and promote war wherever possible. And so again, this just goes to show the absolute folly of this policy. And to see Israel, they had this huge close call with Iran, narrowly avoiding a massive regional war. Again, just like after the Soleimani assassination, we do have to credit this largely, if not mostly, to the restraint in Tehran. And then they go and they ramp up the bombing in Syria. As Dave said, they bombed Syria for a third time within a week, referring to that drone strike on the 25th that killed 2 members of Hezbollah. And so it's just absolutely indefensible. And what more can you say? It's just the Biden administration is completely off the rails, and the Israelis are running the show. I mean, you're watching the Congress every day make excuses for this, and they're all lockstep behind Israel, save sans Thomas Massie, who's pretty much waging a war against AIPAC right now, which is great to see. But I don't know how much more the American people can stomach their so-called representatives lying to their faces and telling them Israel is more important than them, because this is impoverishing all of us, and it's already gotten American soldiers killed in the region. And frankly, the troops we still have, thousands in Iraq and Syria, those are basically tripwire forces. They're going to come under attack again, severe attack from the Shiite militias at some point in the future if we stay on this trajectory. And then what happens then? Do we, do we go and fight Iran for Israel, or go in and reinvade Iraq and try and overthrow that government, or just wipe out the popular mobilization forces, or expand our occupation in Syria, take more territory, already illegally control a third of the country and are crushing them under sanctions and stealing their resources? It's just a horrible situation. And obviously, the Palestinians are the worst victims in all of this, but the American people are also being treated horrifically by people who are ostensibly, like I said, they're representatives. It's just a disgrace.
All right, Connor, thanks for that update, and we will be back with more next week.